Now it's my pleasure to introduce our presenter today, Brian Hannon. He's VP of Sales here at LeveragePoint, and he heads up our value selling initiatives by showing our customers how to capture, communicate, and deliver value in every customer interaction. So with that, Brian, welcome.
Thank you, Nick, and hello to everyone. Let me share my screen here, and Nick, you can tell me if there's any issues.
Good to go.
Great. So in thinking about the webinar for December, I think we kind of put our heads together and tried to think about, what's changed over the year. I think there's some obvious things. I voted that we spend 45 minutes talking about pandemics, but that was voted down. So these are some of the concepts that I think we've seen accelerate over the past, say, 6 to 9 months. And so what we've done is sort of combine these into kind of 3 main themes, which I'll touch on. And we'll touch on those concepts as well as part of these conversations. So essentially what we're seeing, and we've, again, been seeing this for years now, but it's becoming even more critical, more popular, is this move towards communicating the financial impacts of your offerings if you are a B2B corporation with a reasonably complex sale, and if you have salespeople who are out there trying to differentiate themselves. And again, we'll talk more about that. But the shift towards explaining not only what your offerings do, but how they impact your customer's business, and really demonstrating that you understand your customer's business, is becoming less of a major best practice and more of a requirement. I think when I started with LeveragePoint years ago, my estimation was 5 to 10% of salespeople in a typical sales force were doing this already. Some people kind of were born with the ability to do this. Many of us had to learn it. But that 5 to 10% tended to be the best salespeople. And I think what we're starting to see is, how do we take that skill set and really help as much of the rest of the sales force become effective at these things as possible? So that's kind of what LeveragePoint does. In fact, that's exactly what LeveragePoint does. We use this slide, and this is sort of an early commercial, but we'll talk less about LeveragePoint. But I think it helps sort of understand our approach. We use this concept of a value lens, and the items on the left-hand side here you can think about as activities and decision-making processes that are made internal to a typical B2B organization. So imagine during product development and during product launch, you're making all sorts of decisions. And if you can use a value lens to help inform those decisions, it will ultimately make you much more successful. So part of what LeveragePoint does, and part of what our cloud platform does, is helps companies make these types of decisions, and you see them listed on the left-hand side. So whether it's trying to understand, are we building the right product that will deliver value once it's launched, which is critical because it's too late once you've built it, right? You end up with a major failure if you've built something that doesn't really provide much value, and of course, as a result, doesn't generate much revenue. But value-based pricing, customer segmentation based on value, and ultimately being able to clearly communicate that value are all concepts and decisions that are made inside the organization. If we shift over to the right, which we'll focus more on today, this involves now taking that knowledge, taking that communication, taking the fact that you've quantified this and you understand it, and turning it into a sales tool that your sales force can use. So whether it's ramping up the revenues for a brand new product by getting your sales teams excited about a new technology that provides significant value, that's very important. But even with existing products, whether it's existing products that are highly innovative, but maybe you're not achieving the revenues that you expected, or maybe you're being forced to discount way too much. Usually that is because your sales teams don't fully understand the value and they're not communicating the value. But even with kind of mainstream revenue products, where you know that these few offerings will either make your year very successful if you're selling a lot, or could hurt you badly if you don't. Being able to compare yourself against the competition and clearly communicate the value that you provide over and above what they do becomes very important as well. So there's multiple areas that value stories or value propositions become critical to a company's success. And we'll focus more on what's on the right-hand side here today. So looking at that through a value lens, you know, if we apply this outcome-based thought process to ourselves, why should companies care? Why should salespeople care? Well, simply put, you will sell more at higher prices in a quicker process if you incorporate value as part of your standard sales process. And we'll talk more about what that means, but what it means to salespeople is bigger commission checks. What it means to product people are quicker revenue goals, or hitting your goals much quicker. And it also means less discounting pressure. You're not consistently having to discount these new technologies that you've introduced. In addition, we'll talk more about maintaining customers. So once you've completed that initial sale, you want to sell them more. And whether you're a cloud company that is trying to renew contracts, or you're an industrial company that is trying to expand your presence within an account, you know, get more product lines, you know, sell more into an existing account. All of that can be enhanced through value. So let's talk about the first one. So one of the dramatic shifts that happened, and I think it was probably in the February-March timeframe, salespeople essentially couldn't travel anymore. And that scared many, many salespeople, because this is how they've been selling for years. You know, they would certainly use the internet and phone partially, but it was never to do sort of the heavy lifting. The heavy lifting was always on site, whether they're doing a big presentation, whether they're meeting with an executive team, sometimes even spending several days in and out of an account, meeting with multiple people within the organization and really building that relationship. So the idea that they couldn't do that anymore was very nerve-wracking. The way I sort of look at this process and really what's been accelerated, you know, when I started selling maybe 30 years ago, I've lost count now, it was much more of a relationship type sale. I remember having a conversation with one of my colleagues, I think within my first year or so of starting a software sales job. And he was very successful, and he said, this is the easiest job in the world. You just take people out to lunch. And at the end of the lunch, you ask them if they want to buy anything. And, you know, sometimes they do, sometimes they don't. But if you do enough lunches, you're going to make enough sales. And I remember that conversation clearly. And in fact, it worked. And now I'm sure he was doing a lot more than just taking people to lunch, but it was really this approach of just build a relationship with someone. And the more successful your relationship is, the more successful you'll be in getting more business within that account. I then watched sort of as this changed from this relationship sale to more of a feature and benefit approach, which is, hey, we have this new technology. We're coming out with this new product. Look at all the great things it does. Look at all the speeds and feeds and the new, you know, the new algorithms or the new general technology that we're introducing, and I'm going to spend all my time as a salesperson talking about all the great things that the product does. And hopefully, eventually, I'll explain why it's so much better than anything else they could consider, and I'll get the sale that way. In reality, that's still how many B2B organizations sell. The most successful ones, and I think this probably started with SAP a number of years ago, understood that they're selling technology to accomplish a goal. And if they could clearly articulate that goal in the form of cost savings or in the form of revenue increase for their customers, they would be able to differentiate themselves, and they'd be able to get access to much higher levels within the organization that they're trying to sell to. Now, this value-based selling piece here is really the interesting part. I think that's what happened. That's what's happening over the past 6 months or so. The reason that the feature and benefit approach is starting to lose significant steam is that when you're live in front of prospects or customers and you're presenting your 200 PowerPoint deck, they can't necessarily leave the room, so they're kind of stuck with you. So the pressure to change might become less. But now when you're doing this over the web, you need to change your approach, or people will literally tune you out, and you'll find out at the end of the hour of your going through all your slides that they weren't paying attention to 45–50% of it. So what people are starting to see is that if they need to differentiate themselves by actually coming in with a different message that the prospects may or may not be familiar with, and this is really where value-based selling comes. So we've kind of broken this out into soft and hard impacts, and the soft impacts I'll start with, and then we can go into the hard ones right after. So I just alluded to the first one, which is differentiation. When as a receiver of this presentation from a salesperson, when you start seeing this head down the path of here's what my company does, here's how long we've been around, and then I'm going to spend a lot of time talking about my product. People have been trained and get very deflated when they know that's what's coming up. So the way to differentiate yourself as a salesperson is actually not to start talking about your product. Is to start making a claim that you understand their business and you've thought about this, and based on some initial research, you think you can start to understand the financial impact that your offering can have. And if I can make a claim early in the sales process that I think I could save you $500,000 per year, Mr. Prospect, then I can start asking the questions, is that savings enough for you to consider this an important project? Because if it's not, well, then we can shake hands and maybe talk again next year. And I won't spend a lot of time heading down that road of look at all my great technology if at the end of the day it's not impressing you in terms of cost savings or revenue increases, then we're not going to eventually close the deal. And what happens is you get stuck into that no decision cycle, which I'm sure many of you are familiar with. So the differentiation kind of brings new life into the sales process. And if you're doing it and your competition is not, it immediately puts you way ahead. Now, the other thing that we start to see, and we're starting to hear more and more, is this concept of customer intimacy. And it relates to kind of what I just said, which is if you're saying things that are interesting, that are helping customers understand the impacts to their business and how they can improve their own business through your offerings, you're providing something that is unique, typically, and you're providing something that can be engaging. Now, when you're engaging and you get more time with the customer, even if it's over the internet like this, ultimately you're going to deepen that relationship. And what we start to see with a good value proposition is that if it's digital and interactive, you can get them to participate. You can get them to help you build the value story and make it become more specific to what they're seeing in their business. And that time spent together, kind of co-creating this business case, is really what drives the customer intimacy. The other factor here is that they're providing more and more data to you so that you both can create or craft this business case. That data helps you understand them much better. If this is a one-way product presentation and you're not getting any data, then as a competitor, you're in trouble. And if your competition is doing this and you're not, you need to pay attention. And then finally, this business case that you craft with the customer leads to a very clear and quick decision. If you can demonstrate that you get financial impact on your prospect's business, they're not going to wait around to make a decision. And in fact, we've seen many cases and discussions from our customers that talk about getting to the right person in the organization with a financial business case closes the deal almost immediately. And there's no more waffling. It's, well, if this is true, which based on what you're saying, we think it is, if we wait a month or if we wait 2 months, we're just hurting ourselves. So it helps them make that decision more firmly, and it helps them make that decision more quickly. So the other impacts, I think, are the ones that the sales organization gets excited about specifically. And we use this concept of value sales velocity. So people are familiar with the idea of sales velocity, and this is the sales velocity equation here that you're seeing. And really your goal is to move these levers in the right direction so that you're seeing more benefit. So that's in general sales velocity. The great thing about value is that it impacts these levers all in the right direction without you sometimes even realizing it. And I know that sounds too good to be true, but we'll talk a little bit more about that. So when I'm introducing value early in a sales cycle, what I'm doing is heading straight to the answers to the test, right? If I can engage a prospect and say, you know, we've worked with organizations similar to yours. We don't know all the details of your operation yet, but we can make some estimates. And the reason we're going to make some estimates for this first or second call with you is to help you understand the scale and the size of this benefit. And as I mentioned a few minutes ago, if the scale and the size of the benefit is not exciting to the prospect, then you've both just agreed to table this thing and move on. So the prospect doesn't have to waste any more time hearing things that he may have interest in, but he's not going to spend a lot of his next 3 to 6 months engaged in. And the salesperson can take all of that effort that they were going to put into this opportunity and place it elsewhere. So what you're doing is immediately increasing the number of qualified opportunities, but you're also streamlining your funnel. So you're not wasting a bunch of resources. I talk to sales leaders all the time who they know they have a sales force that is spending a lot of time on all these opportunities, but then they know their funnel review every month. They have these deals that have been sitting around for months and months and months. And they know a bunch of them aren't going to close. It's just hard to figure out which ones. So being able to qualify deals much earlier in the sales cycle is one of those levers that will impact the overall sales velocity. The second is the size of the deal. And there's a couple of reasons that value helps here. One is earlier in the sales cycle. So as you're trying to understand what a solution could look like for this prospect, if you're able to articulate that all of the elements of your solution, whether it's product, whether it's software, hardware, software, could be services. What happens to many salespeople is that they go in even with a winning proposal, and that proposal gets cut down because a customer says, well, do we really need all of this? And it's not clear we need these services, for example. We hear that all the time. So when you go in with a proposal that doesn't clearly articulate the value of all the elements, there's a good chance they're going to try to cut out some of those elements. But if you go in with a proposal that clearly articulates the value of all the elements, then cutting out any one of those is just hurting the prospect. So they're going to see that and go, well, it sounds like we do need this piece, or we're just making this overall solution less valuable. So the size of the deals, you could say, stay big instead of shrinking based on negotiation. But also what happens towards the end of the sales cycle is that you're able to maintain your price, really for the same reasons I just discussed. So as you head into procurement, if you have a strong value story that you have collaborated with your prospect on, then when you present that to procurement, they're going to have a much harder time pushing you down on price. Because if I'm generating an additional $1 million of value to a prospect in my proposal, and procurement comes back and says, well, we want a $100,000 discount on that, that kind of doesn't make sense, right? I'm giving you $1 million in value and you're asking for more discount. I actually have much more confidence in pushing back on that. And part of this is the salespeople are convinced themselves that they're delivering value. Whereas a salesperson without a good value prop, much more willing to cave, right? And what they end up doing is they go back to their management and says, you know, I can really close this deal. We can just give them a $100,000 discount. And management caves too, right? They can't see everything that's happening within every deal. So they need the revenue and they're willing to take it. So if salespeople have much more confidence, they're much more willing to push back on that discount. The third area here is win rates. And one of the, I think the hidden benefits that I see in our approach at LeveragePoint is the methodology we use, something called EVE, or economic value estimation. The initial questions that methodology asks are, what are you comparing yourself to? So if I have an offering and I know I'm going head to head with a competitor, I can build a value story that compares us directly with the competitor. We have some things we do differently. And if we can articulate what the value of those things are, and then we present this to the prospect, we're helping them make that decision. And it becomes more obvious why they should go with us versus the competition. Now, the competition also could be do nothing, right? We know that maybe we're the only ones in there. And we know that if they're not excited enough, they're just going to stay with what they have. They'll kick this down the road another year. So the competition could be do nothing. And if you build a strong value story that compares doing nothing to investing, and it's clear investing makes more sense, you're going to improve your win rates. And then finally, shorten sales cycles. And the obvious thing here, and this is one of those hidden benefits that we find salespeople start to see as they get into value selling, is that the conversation that they have with the people that are familiar within accounts. So they might be dealing with mid-level managers, operations folks, who they talk to all the time, who actually love to talk about features and benefits. They love technology. Once they start having a financial conversation, those people start to go, this is a little bit out of the norm. They like it, but they're not as comfortable. And their first instinct is, well, I should really bring my boss into this conversation. And ultimately, that drives you up the chain of people within the buying organization you're working with. And the closer you get to the top, the closer you get to the decision makers. So ultimately, what ends up happening is you get those conversations sooner, decisions get made sooner, and you're closing deals much faster. So here's some of the key takeaways. What we always recommend is work with your product management, or if you are a product manager, identify what your top value drivers are for an offering, and go ahead and make an effort to quantify what those are. By the way, LeveragePoint helps you do that as well. And then equip your sales force with interactive tools that have those value drivers embedded in a value conversation or a value story. So just creating an Excel spreadsheet, while the math might be right, if it doesn't get used in front of a customer, you're out of luck, basically. Start talking value early in the sales cycle, and use value to build that customer intimacy and really differentiate yourself. Customize the story based on the feedback you get from the customers, and really ask them to participate in the back and forth, because it really is going to help them as much as it will help you. And if you can build that collaborative relationship and increase that customer intimacy, your chances of success are much higher. And then finally, realize that value is going to be a major differentiator for your sales team. So, building new products is great, adding new technology is great, but using value to sell more of what you have today is probably the most efficient approach to increase profits and increase revenue. So next, we're going to talk about outcome-based selling and really how that's changed. So the one of the quotes that I always go to from corporate visions is, the buyers who introduce value first within the sales cycle and sort of create that vision win the business almost 75% of the time. And it kind of seems like an unfair advantage, but it's true. Now, one of the ideas that you may have noticed in the beginning was this IoT concept. And a lot of our customers are talking about that more and more. It's been around for several years, but what you're starting to see now are kind of the traditional companies out there, the big industrial sellers out there, starting to make the shift actively now. So, the big group of large companies have already seen the front runners out there making the moves, and they're starting to make those changes as well. So it's probably kind of mid change right now. And really what they're doing is, if I'm a company that traditionally sold a large box, maybe a expensive HVAC system for buildings, I'm starting to realize that the hardware is really becoming a commodity. And in order to be successful, I need to create different offerings that aren't necessarily hardware focused. What we're starting to see this shift happen is that the offerings are really now looking more like use cases. And those use cases are made up of the hardware, the software, and services in order to accomplish certain goals. And in fact, this transformation really directly relates to kind of what LeveragePoint does and really what value selling does. You're going from, I'm going to sell you this box that, is high capital investment, and you'll probably have for 5 to 10 years, to I'm selling you this ability to optimize your factory through these various elements. And I have the ability to turn that on in a moment's notice, or maybe, significantly reduce the cost to kind of get that moving. But then every few years, I need to potentially renew a contract with you. So you need to understand the value I'm delivering, or the ability for you to change vendors is also much easier. So it's really shifting this whole idea. So the IoT transformation involves many, many different companies. It involves a technology stack that starts with the hardware, as I mentioned, but now you're putting sensors on the hardware so you can start to gather data, machine data. And if you're a company that has many customers, you can gather data and you can start to analyze that data across a number of different organizations, and now start to sell services based on prediction based on that data. So this is where you get into the IoT connectivity, where you're gathering all this data, you're learning from it, you're building algorithms to predict what will happen with future sales inside a factory, for example, and you're able to predict how to optimize, what they're doing. So what we're starting to see is that there's many companies in these spaces, and some companies will be successful and some won't. There's so many, I think, in there right now that it's almost expected that many of those will go away over the next 5 to 10 years. The ones that are going to be successful, I think, will part of the reason for that success will be their ability to transform their organization through a value lens. And it's a combination of their product folks understanding that they're now selling these use cases, and you can see some examples here on the slide. And the product people are building these use cases, but now you have this sales force who's been selling hardware for many, many years. You need to dramatically shift the way they think and they sell and the way they communicate value as well. And so what we start to see from our customers is, okay, we're building these algorithms and we know what they do, but how do we communicate and how do we price that with our customers? So what LeveragePoint does is helps our customers create a story. And you can sort of see the stories in these boxes here, right? So if we have a company that maybe 10 years ago was selling pesticides to a farmer, now they're actually explaining to the farmer that, yeah, we sell pesticides, but we also sell software. Maybe there are satellites that we can analyze your farm, and we have lots of data that we've gathered from many, many different farms that can tell you when to plant, when to put the pesticides on. And our whole goal is to increase your yield per acre. And we can place a value on that. We know if we increase your yield by 5%, that's going to be equal to X to the farmer. So we can then think about, well, if we capture 1 or 2% of that, the value of that yield, then that's a fair deal. And we're bringing all these other elements to the farmer to help them make a decision, both in what to invest in, but also when to do things and how to do things. So that's becoming fairly common now. A lot of these others, are in various trajectories, but the exciting part is that the value pool is really changing dramatically. And these are some examples of use cases, but there are thousands out there that either haven't been discovered yet or are beginning to be discovered. So this is a highly fluid and kind of an exciting, in my viewpoint, maybe that's a geeky statement, but kind of exciting time for innovation, bringing all of these possibilities together. So I think the message here is there's a lot of change, there's a lot of competition out there, and the companies that are the most effective at making that transformation into outcome-based selling. So we're selling you a capability, and we're predicting what that capability is going to do for your business. I keep going back to the factory. Rather than sell you equipment for your factory, if I'm selling you a capability that includes the raw materials, it includes equipment, and it includes the ability to monitor that equipment, fix that equipment before it breaks down, then really what I'm selling you is the ability to produce more widgets every day. And if I can help you produce 10% more widgets and you can sell 10% more widgets, then we can predict how much money you will make. And that, as a salesperson, if I can communicate that, then I'm going to be much more successful than the companies who aren't as effective at it. So having a strong value story that demonstrates you understand your customer's business will help you do that. So finally, the third area here really is around customer success. So what companies are realizing, and again, this has been accelerated with the COVID-19 issue, is that a lot of their revenue growth really should be coming from existing customers. And if they're not focusing heavily on that, they're really missing out on an opportunity, because the cost to keep those customers and to get revenue growth from those customers is much less than the cost to go out and find a new customer. And I think that's generally agreed on today. So then the question is, well, how do we become more successful at engaging with our existing customers and helping them understand what we're delivering and why they should want more of it? So if you think about the cloud software industry, and this is my background, so I probably know more about this. When I started in the industry, companies would invest in software applications that would be intended to last for several years. So they viewed those as capital purchases in some cases, or many cases early on. And they would also invest in computers to be able to run that software. So it was a very significant, large investment that they would then, expense over a number of years. We can think of that as sort of customer success 1.0. What happened with the introduction of cloud is that the companies didn't need to invest in the computers as much or anymore at all. And now the software companies were really signing 1, 2, or 3 year contracts that could go away much quicker than previously. So it was much more flexible. They could charge less because of all the benefits of the cloud. But then what they found was their customers were constantly evaluating, well, should we go with a different vendor? Are they providing enough value? And they learned very quickly that they were losing customers at a much more rapid rate than they were before. So the shift towards customer success 2.0 is really, okay, we've invested heavily in this new customer. We know that it's much less expensive if we can keep them and actually generate additional business with them. So how do we more successfully make that shift? And that's where the customer success as a part of the business, I think, originated, and we're seeing that continue to grow. So the question then becomes, once you have signed an initial contract, or once you're doing business with a company for the first time, is trying to set the stage where you can answer the question, here's why you made a good decision. Here's why you made a good decision going with us, and we're going to make you even more excited about doing more business with us. We've sort of broken this idea of how value can inform many of these elements in terms of the customer success or the post-sale. People use post-sale, but I think you really should approach it as increased sale or increased business, right? Your goal is to hopefully do more business with these companies, and so post-sale sounds a little defeating. I view value as a way to clearly set goals with a new customer. So one of the challenges sometimes you have, obviously, is you close the deal, they're excited, you're excited, and then over time people get pulled in different directions. So if you can use value as a way to set goals, that here's the value we think we can deliver, let's get back together on a regular basis and determine whether we are delivering that value, it's a great way to stay engaged with customers. And if you consistently demonstrate that you're delivering that value, they will look for other opportunities to do business with you, maybe in other parts of their organization or other divisions within a larger company. The expectations is important as well. And I just referred to this idea of getting excited in the beginning of a relationship, but then getting pulled in different directions. But if you set clear value goals, and then over time, people are not delivering on what's been set up in terms of delivering on the expectations you set in the beginning, if you become the customer success person that just consistently says, well, we're not doing this, we're not doing that, and you almost become a person that they're like, oh, they're going to call us out again because we didn't do this. But if you use value as a way to say, hey, we agreed 6 months ago that if we did all the right things, we can help reduce your costs and generate an additional $500,000 for your company. Then when you go back and have those conversations again, you're always going back to that $500,000. And it becomes less of you reminding them that they haven't delivered and more of you reminding them that there's dollars on the table that maybe they're missing out on. And maybe that's a good reason to get back on track and make sure that both parties are participating and hopefully delivering on what's been agreed on. The other benefit here is around best practices. So the value that you deliver and the ways that you deliver it might be very different based on different verticals or based on different sizes of organizations. So being able to bucket companies that are similar and then being able to understand the value you deliver it and how you deliver it for those different segments will be much more efficient and ultimately make you much more successful. The decisions are the obvious one. And in fact, the expansion decisions become much easier. You know, if I'm working with a customer for a year or two and I'm consistently delivering on the value and it's documented and we agree on it, then making a decision for an additional purchase becomes, you know, a fraction of the time and a fraction of the effort than it would be if that was a brand new customer. So you make the decisions much clearer and much easier to make for your customer. And then collaboration, I think, is really throughout all of this conversation. So it's you're not telling them the value you're delivering. You're collaborating with them. You're agreeing on certain numbers, certain factors, and then ultimately you're agreeing on the value. That becomes critical. If it's a one-way conversation, it's not going to be very effective. So takeaways here, you know, existing customers are critical and they're much less expensive to maintain and to grow. And to be honest, it's much more enjoyable as a salesperson when you're building relationships with people and you're delivering value and they're happy and you're happy. That's a perfect scenario, right? The customers want to understand the value that you're delivering because it affirms the decision that they made. They made a good one, and they can explain to their management all the value that is being generated here. Personally, we think a value platform that you use to drive a lot of this conversation and this activity. People call these executive business reviews or quarterly business reviews, but having a graphical value tool that can easily convey the value and can be changed based on the conversations that you're having live is a great way to embed a lot of the best practices. We talked about the segments and different customer verticals. Best way to sort of capture all of that good best practice in a single place. And then collaboration we touched on as well. So I think I was going to show a quick demo. And I will make it quick because I know we're at 45 minutes right now. So this is the LeveragePoint platform. I logged in here and I'm in the sales part of our application. So as I mentioned earlier, we're a cloud application. You can see here we have 128 value stories that we have in our demo area. And hopefully I'm still logged in. We'll find out in a moment. I'm going to pull up one of our demos here. So this is a company called ConnectWise. You can look them up. They're a real company. I think they're headquartered in Florida. And we took one of their white papers and generated an interactive value story from that, which I'm about to show you here. I'm happy to go into a more detailed demo with anyone who's interested, so feel free to follow up, send a note at the end, and we can do that. More than happy to go in. But this is what a typical value story might look like. So what you're seeing here, think of this as a combination of a PowerPoint presentation with a mathematical model that's embedded inside of it that helps you kind of manage the data, as you'll see in a moment, and helps you to have thought through a lot of the quantification before actually having a conversation with the customer. So these, again, can look like a typical PowerPoint presentation. We help our customers create these, but they are interactive. So what you start to see early in one of these value stories is a focus on value drivers within an offering. So here, ConnectWise articulated 7 different value drivers. These are how they're helping their customers to reduce costs in most cases here, or maybe potentially generate additional revenue. What you'll see in many of our value stories is an assumption screen. These can be more complex than what you're seeing here, but think of this as a way for a salesperson to begin to prepare for a customer. So maybe they start to fill in some basic information here around, well, what's the annual revenue of this customer, and what are the certain criteria that if I'm selling ConnectWise, then these assumptions are critical for me to begin building a customized value story for this prospect. Then, in general, our value stories will then drill into the individual value drivers. So if you remember a moment ago, we identified 7 different value drivers. And based on those assumptions, we begin to make some predictions about the benefits. And you can see they're split across 7 different value drivers here. You'll notice there's 7 screens here that match up to those. So what you would then do is start to talk about each individual value driver and start to confirm some of the information from the prospect. They might tell you you're overestimating, you're underestimating, but if it's a good story, they tend to want to participate. And that's really the goal of this, is if you can get them to participate, by the end of this value story, you have, within that, say, 30 or 45-minute conversation, you've collaborated on a business case. And hopefully by the end of it, the business case is strong enough to keep them excited. But if it's not, well, then you know the deal's not qualified. So again, I won't go through all these in detail, but again, we're happy to do this with any of you individually. Then we come towards the end of a value story. Now we're trying to summarize. What are some of the key things that a customer should know? Well, people talk about ROI a lot, about the length of time for payback. We build these so they can be flexible, so that different people have different needs and wants, and the ability to display different types of data. We use different charts and graphs, so we have them as options within the platform. And again, different stories might need different ways to tell the story. Some people like these waterfall charts, which allow you to sort of graphically and visually show the value that's being delivered, maybe the investment that would need to make if you're going to bring in a new cloud vendor around training or other types of investment. And then finally, what is sort of a summary discussion about the value that they would get, and maybe about the investment that's going to be required to achieve that value. And we have ways to show that over multiple years or on a per year basis, et cetera. So then finally, you can save this. This can be tied into a CRM system like Salesforce.com. And then we might even want to export this into a PDF or a PowerPoint. So we click a button and this will then generate a PDF. So this can then be sent to our prospects. So now we have a record of our conversation, but more importantly, we have a record of the changes that we both agreed on and made. And now they have a business proposal in their inbox that they could then share directly with one of their managers, or directly with executives within the organization, and say, hey, there's this business case that we put together very quickly with a potential vendor of ours, and they're claiming that there's a $4 million value. We invest $500,000. This is something that we should talk to them about. So these types of things move deals forward much quicker. And that's really, and ultimately help close the deal. And that's really what you want as a salesperson. So Nick, I think I'm going to pass this back to you if I remember correctly.
Great. No, nailed it. So thank you, Brian. And as Brian mentioned, if you're interested in seeing a more detailed demo, we have a checkbox in the exit survey. So just indicate that, and we can follow up with you after the session. And even if not, take the exit survey anyway to enter a raffle for a copy of Dollarizing Differentiation Value. So a few questions here. Still plenty of time to answer them. So if you have a question, feel free to put it into the right-hand box. But Brian, if I don't have all the customer-specific data, how do I make a value story?
Yeah, so we get that question a lot, and I'd say there's kind of two answers to that. One answer is that individually you may not know all of the customer-specific data, but typically as an organization you will. So our recommendation is that you create a cross-functional team, especially if you're doing this for the first time, that might involve a product manager for the offering that you're focused on. It might involve a marketing person, say a pre-sales type person who hears different discussions at different customers, and maybe a salesperson as well. When all of those people put their heads together, the amount of data that comes out of that collaboration is 10 times the amount that you would get on your own. And what we find is that, especially in organizations that claim they don't have the data, they suddenly have the data. And even if you don't have 100% of it, you can put a value story together based on how you think you're improving a customer's operation or business. And if you go into a conversation and say, hey, this is an estimate, we're gathering data from different customers, we're not claiming this is 100% correct, we want your feedback, Mr. Prospect or Mrs. Prospect, then they will tell you you're way off. And that conversation then informs the value story. So maybe you're going in and having conversations with existing customers and showing them the value story you've put together, getting their feedback, making changes, and you'll get it to a point where now you're ready to go with a new prospect, and you've kind of beat up the value story enough and gotten enough feedback that now you can take that same approach with a new prospect. Hey, this is our best estimate of how we think we can help you improve your business. Can we spend some time walking through it? Those conversations will go, in general, will go pretty well. If you go in with the attitude of we know exactly how your business runs, then you might either get silence or you might get pushback. So it can also be not just the data, but the approach that you take.
Makes sense. So another one, I've worked on a team with folks that have sold features and benefits for decades. How do I get them on board with value? So
there's a couple different ways. We recommend sales leadership be involved early on. So if salespeople see that their management thinks this is critical, that is one of the factors that will inform their either desire to participate or not. So I would say getting leadership on board is one, but the other one, which is probably more effective, is that running an experiment with a subset of salespeople and capturing the data from that experiment is critical, because salespeople look to their colleagues, especially the successful ones, for how they should do things and changes they should make in their process. And if you are presenting to the general sales force, here's a value story that some of the best salespeople in the organization helped create, it inherently has their best practices embedded in the story. And by the way, we've used this for 6 months, and they found that they're closing more business and their commission checks are bigger. That type of a story will generate a lot of interest. And you'd be surprised that salespeople are looking for things like this. They sometimes just don't know how to articulate it. If they get evidence from their colleagues, then you'll find them jumping on board much quicker.
And And that makes sense. And we have several pieces of content on our website, including keys to a sustainable value selling initiative white paper that I can include in the post webinar email send that covers that. So this one's interesting. So I think this person's referencing the IoT slide with the industry impacts, but we probably have dozens of potential impacts, not just one or two in my industry. How do I determine which ones to present? And I'm assuming they're trying to avoid presenting 12 different value drivers in one conversation.
Yeah, I mean, it's really, so we call them value drivers. I think maybe a lot of people refer them that way. What you'll find within an organization, if you sit your salespeople down and you start to talk to them about, a CFO conversation, a CFO is interested in these elements. My operations person doesn't care about those, but cares about these. What you'll end up creating is sort of a chart of the people and the value drivers, and you can put an X in the box where they match. And then, especially with our value stories, which are customizable, you can literally turn on or turn off value drivers based on who you're speaking with. And it will update and create a unique value story for your director of operations versus your CFO. And so you can decide before heading in, which story do I want to tell?
Great. How soon after a deal should we introduce a customer value prop?
So it should be right after. You should introduce value literally the first conversation after you sign a contract. It should become part and an expectation of every conversation or the key conversations, I should say, that you're having post-sale with customers. Using value as a target, and as we discussed earlier, helping you set goals and expectations with it, it should be interwoven kind of throughout all your conversations, and you should start right away.
Great. So I think that's a good place to leave it for today. So we'll follow up with anyone who had questions that we didn't get to. And that actually concludes our webinar program for 2020. So we just love to thank everyone for joining us, not only today, but throughout the rest of the year as well. And before you go, we're going to be doing this in 2021 too. So make sure to register for our first webinar of the year during our exit survey. We've got a crowd favorite coming on board, Stefan Leozu. And he'll be sharing an interesting presentation on ways to capture value in large contracts, as well as navigating the RFP process. So that should be a really fun one, and it's going to be on January 27th. So we got a little bit of time. So we'll get you pre-registered if you indicate that you'd like so in the exit survey. And that'll be it for us today. So a big thank you to Brian for taking the time to present, and a big thanks to everyone for joining us throughout the year. Have a wonderful rest of your week and upcoming holiday season, and take care.